I've read an article recently where someone was talking about you create for other people, right? You create something to share it. Otherwise, what's the point in making it? And why would you be putting something out in the world if you're not designing it for someone? Hello, everyone out there, wherever you may be, on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, wherever else this podcast might reach. It's Joe here. Probably the first episode I've put up in a while, assuming this makes it out. I want to talk a bit about one of those key parts of the creative struggle. This is not something that's limited to maybe writing or painting or any of the traditional high forms of art, but any sort of creating in business, in life. I don't know. And a far-reaching dilemma, one that's always been top of my mind and close to my heart to talk about, because I just think it's very, very, very interesting. What thinking about an audience versus yourself in the creative tension there? What sort of things that it brings to the surface, and what sort of discussions it brings up? Because I've read an article recently where someone was talking about you create for other people, right? You create something to share it. Otherwise, what's the point in making it? And why would you be putting something out in the world if you're not designing it for someone? Okay. So we'll hash through a few of those thoughts. And maybe this is a bit of a recap. This is going to be a bit more informal. I can talk to you about some things that have been going on, kind of behind the curtain, I guess. Laid back episode. Me chilling here with a coffee. Sunny day. You, wherever you are. I sincerely hope you're well. So yeah, some things have been happening. I want to start with talking about this very podcast / YouTube channel itself. And then I'll talk about writing. And I'll weave some other stuff, some journey stuff in there as well. But yeah, this podcast, I sometimes remember how did this even get going? And this started, it would have been 2020. So around the time of COVID, just gave me the opportunity to do it. And I think if I remember correctly, I started this because I had an itch. I wanted to say stuff. I wanted to get certain ideas out there. And I thought it'd be a great way to connect with the world and connect with people. And I thought it suited me to the ground having a podcast. That's what I remember anyway. Who knows our reasons for what we do? And I've explored that too. And then along the way, it's been a very interesting twisting and turning journey. I've gone down, if you look through the thumbnails, for example, on YouTube or the episode titles, you can probably see many different shifts and changes in direction and lots of different energies. And that's been a natural thing as I've kind of shifted and probably tried to figure out what will work, tried to pivot and see what will work, what will resonate. And that, I guess, is kind of like the metaphor would be a plant that's stuck in a dark cupboard and it just tries to bend itself towards a ray of light. And that's obviously, if you're trying to succeed, that's a very natural logic, right? In the startup world, they have a term called product market fit. It's pretty self-explanatory, I think, but obviously if you've got high-end jewelry, that the market for that might not be obviously the impoverished people in society. Obviously, the high-end market be for the high-end market. So obviously, the product has to fit a market, and that's not something I disagree with to start with. So yes, things have to be connected with people who fit them, and often sometimes you start out with something and you don't know who it's for. You don't know who it will connect with and vibe with most. Actually, you probably never do, really. You're always figuring it out as you go. There's no way of totally knowing, how something will be received in advance. You might get clues, you might get insight, but you probably don't really know. So there's that. And I think this podcast and I did talk about it in one sort of more emotional episode. I think very clearly, this channel podcast of mine that with Joe Eby thing suffered from me trying to make it more successful. And you can obviously get into a debate there on what's successful. But yeah, I definitely tried to play into things like clickbait, strategy, and all these. And you can't, and maybe you can't even, well, maybe you could critique them. Maybe you could say that's part of the game, that's part of the job. But to me, yeah, product market fit whenever you're doing something. If it's a business, if it's a podcast, if it's a book, if it's marrying up a romantic partnership. The laws of product market fit are there, and they're not to be denied by the likes of me. But there appears to be another dimension to this equation. It's a part of what happened with me, even if you look at my recent videos. I would say with this channel, I keep getting confused about what I could and should put out. And sometimes I think I don't need to, obviously, there's no need to put anything out. And that's why for large periods, I don't put anything out. I don't imagine there's a large group of people who are very upset by that, waiting, diligently always for me to put a video or a podcast episode out or something. I imagine the world keeps spinning, and mainly it does. I wouldn't attribute the bad things that happen in the world to when I don't put a video or an episode out. I wouldn't attribute them to the podcast being quiet. I think it's just a coincidence. If I was being self-aware, that's what I would say. So it doesn't need to exist. And yet, bloody hell, I keep having this itch. I keep having this itch to come back to this. And that's what makes me keep doing all different sorts of videos or episodes. Some of them are animated, for crying out loud. Every now and then there's an interview. Sometimes I talk about a book. Sometimes I'm with Lou. Sometimes I'm doing a ramble like this. And so what are you meant to do? And what are the rules? And why does it get confusing? And as I go through this self-soothing therapy session, I think it's about personal clarity, really. I think it's about personal clarity and getting confused about trying to meet the market and trying to meet yourself where you're at. And so this comes into the age-old human cliche around being yourself versus being for others. And so the creative conversation around when you're making something and you're doing your work, and who is it for? And is it for you, or are you designing it for someone else? Obviously, it's some combination of both, right? That's the most sensible answer. But at different times, your energies are, I would say, put into different ends of that spectrum. Sometimes the energies are concentrated in your end of the spectrum and what you want. And sometimes the energies are concentrated to how it will be received. I think that's natural. Sometimes the issues come when we dial into one end of the spectrum over the other, disproportionately for the situation. But I think it's fascinating that that creative struggle mirrors the age-old human struggle, the human cliche around the tension to be yourself, and the best advice always been to be yourself. And every deep and meaningful resource is always pointing back to be yourself. The ultimate message, the ultimate timeless message. And so I journey back, when I keep thinking about what to make, what not to make, and trying not to be a kind of guru know-it-all figure anymore, as I feel like I came across in my earlier batch of episodes, the first 250 or so. So trying to not become that guy again, which I often feel I do when I put something out on this channel. And so try not to be a certain type of person. But wanting to explore complex things, even if there's not much of a reception for it per se, and just doing it in an energy appropriate way. And then seeing what comes of it. That's what is really at the heart of this little project for me. I think I've lost my train of thought. I'm just going to keep this rolling and you're going to wait quietly till I pick it back up. Sorry. That's what happens when I get excited. I get ahead of myself. Yeah. So there's this other dimension, and I guess when something, I think if I'm thinking about it, when something you're creating has part of you, has really a clear part of you in it, um, then that's where I think this gets more complicated. Obviously, if you're going to work on something for a long enough period of time, put enough energy into it. So, for example, I know people who are builders who, they're not attracted to certain projects, even if they pay well, because they want to build to a certain standard. And even though, they're contracted to build something, they have a pride in what they do that supersedes just getting well paid for building. Because obviously, to a point, being well paid for building can become not as rewarding as being well paid for building and building something you're proud of. Right? And I think most people are like that, just in all these different ways. I think everyone's like that. And I think an interesting book and a book character to weave this conversation through is what I think a book I really loved called no, not Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. So well-known author. If you haven't heard of her, you can look her up. And in her book Fountainhead, which is something I'll probably talk about more in future episodes, the central character Howard Rourke is contrasted with another character called Peter Keating. And I would say Peter Keating he's more of a, we'd call him an operator. He's kind of slick. He's great. He's a great talker. He's great. He's almost very good politically, like in a way of he rubs shoulders with the right people. He says the right things to the right people. He gets in with the right crowds. He plays the career game really well. He's very strategic about climbing the ladder. And so he is more adept at that aspect of the world, the commercial side maybe, or the career sense. And then you got this guy called Howard Rourke, who's obviously the opposite. And Howard Rourke is more of a purist. But by the way, they're architects, right? And they studied together at university. Forgot to explain that. And Howard Rourke is just like a staunch purist. So he has no regard for politics, no regard for bureaucracy, and he's stubborn in his artistic purity, right? And Howard Rourke, it certainly comes to his detriment in a way, because he won't design things that do not fit within his kind of artistic vision, even though they will save his business at times. So why I love that story is it really tests these characters' values. It shows them at the extreme, just to show how much it means to someone like a Howard Rourke, their art, and the art. In this case, it's architecture. And then you see that tension throughout the story. And so that's an example of a guy who has principles and a guy who probably appears not to have principles going against each other, and seeing which ones succeed in which way and how success might come in the other way. And if you can be successful, being so staunch and stubborn about that artistic purity, and what place compromise has. So what is an acceptable compromise for those sorts of people, and what isn't? And that's what's interesting. Then you could ask, what does the world need more of? I love contrasting characters. Anyone who will ever read any of the books I've worked on in this period of my life will come to see that, because I love exposing, making clearer those differences that can appear subtle from a distance or on the surface, but once you really go deep down into them, they're quite fascinating, stark differences. They make a big ripple effect. And so one of the when I explore that tension, there's a bit in my first book, 18 and Lost. I would hold it up right now, but I forgot to bring one up with me. I've got the most recent book here with me, but yeah, and but there's a bit I put in 18 and Lost, and I remember I was talking to a friend who had remembered this image, which was nice. That's the thing about imagery. We're talking about something to do with this tension. And she was talking about the image I had in my chapter in that book, my personal chapter, just like a mini biography, talking about the metaphor of the orchestra. And so the idea was that a person in the experience of life is like someone conducting an orchestra, and that you conduct the music you want to play, and that there's an audience almost shouting back what they want you to play. And because everyone wants something at least a little bit different, they'll never all want the same thing. When you're listening to them, you become muddled, and you're trying to conduct this orchestra. You got too many plates spinning. Like, you're trying to please the audience. You don't want to lose the audience. That's your audience. That's who you're playing to, right? And you got this band or whatever with these sections and this guy on flute, and you're trying to, but the music starts to sound terrible when you're obviously trying to filter the demands of the angry mob. And you're in this tension. And it might feel like you don't have an option, except what might happen is if you play your music, gosh, this is very, very cute, isn't it? It's very almost cringe. But, dare I say, if you play your music and just wait to see who comes, and if people leave, then so be it. And if people come, so be it. But at least whoever is left in those seats will be the right audience, because they will be the ones that are there to see you play your music. And you'll have the band with you that is willing to play that music with you. And maybe in this kind of cute metaphor, we all do this to each other. We're at different times our own conductor, and then we play a part in everyone else's band, or sometimes we sit in the audience. And what sort of audience member are we? What sort of band member are we when it's time to, make it about someone else? And what sort of orchestra, what sort of conductor are we when it's our time to conduct, to create? And what you create is not necessarily selfish, but it comes from you, and it is for you and for others. And there's not surely a compromise there, is there? So you see, I'm starting to arrive at an answer to my question. And it's ironic because when I was writing my blog more and doing these earlier podcast episodes, one of the most widely received ideas or ways of looking at this sort of stuff I came up with, and that has stood the test of time, I think, was this idea called the audience of none. And I don't know if I ever did a podcast episode on it yet. I've done hundreds, so gosh, it might be in there somewhere. But there's definitely a blog piece, and maybe I'll link it to this. And the audience of none was this idea that, who would you play for? What song would you do? What job would you do? What activity, hobby? How would you spend your time if you were to perform for an audience of none? For no one. Yeah, I mean, what if money wasn't an object? If there was no time limit, there were no constraints, external conditions on you. What would you do? What is something you do for an audience of none? When the only applause you could stop to listen out for at the end was your own. And I arrived at that metaphor or question I think, if I remember correctly, on a program I was doing, a leadership program with Seth Godin's Emerging Leaders. So there's all these people from all around the world, and I was like the oldest guy in the group, I think. So all these people much younger, very, very talented. Many of them have remained lifelong friends so far. Lifelong, I'm stretching that. But I noticed so many of them were scared to put stuff out that they wanted to put out. scared to do things they wanted to do. I noticed there was just a lot of fear and hesitancy. And so I remember when we were having conversations, I would say, I tried to put it in a way that I could picture it and they could picture it at the same time. And that was the image that sprang to mind. And honestly, I've talked a lot of CRAP online and in podcasts and everything over the past couple of years, a lot of CRAP. But to be honest, that is one of the big ones. I'm very proud of the way of putting this big question. What would you do for an audience of none? Because it strips back all the external reasons really for doing something. And the irony is it's what we do for an audience of none is something that we are in control. And it does start out for us. And so I am I like to think I'm a practical man. I might not look like a practical man at times, but I like to think I'm a practical man. And I know that you have to, obviously, I know product market fit. I know product market fit is real. You gotta abide by the laws of product market fit. You gotta fit in there somehow. And people can argue back and forth around, you don't do it for you, you do it for others, which I think is a false dichotomy. That it's that binary. Probably the fact that we pose it as that binary thing is probably the heart of the problem. You know, Alan Watts, questions which remain insoluble must be persistently insoluble, must be suspected of being questions asked the wrong way. Anyway, enough philosophizing. You can always just throw Da Vinci in there. And I talk about Da Vinci a lot. And the fact that for all the brilliance of the modern understanding of a guy we call Leonardo da Vinci, that most of what he's famous for was not stuff he was famous for at that time. If the biographies and accounts are to be believed, that most of his discoveries in more than 10 fields, that most of them had nothing to do with art, were uncovered from his notebooks, from his private notebooks kept throughout his life. 7,200 pages that they discovered, which probably wasn't even half of what he actually written. So, and this is a guy who didn't share most of it. And I made a video about Da Vinci last year. I thought it was a pretty good one, exploring all this. And I think I put in there how there could have been many reasons he didn't share a lot of these discoveries, like about the human body and anatomy and I think gravity before Newton, or gravity or Newton's laws, sorry, before Newton. There could be many reasons. He could have been scared. He could have been too busy. He could have had ADHD and not had the focus I'm sure he had ADHD. Not a medical opinion, but just a thought. So they're all, but this is a guy who was audience or not. It's very interesting. And so the thing about the audience metaphor and all that stuff, all that cute stuff, is that, you know, this was I'm holding now, if you're listening, I'm holding the book I did with my buddy Paul last year. Holy shit, it's only Tuesday. Which is the first fiction book I'd done. I didn't think I'd get to fiction at this point in my life. Thought maybe it would come in a couple of decades. I was going to be pumping out nonfiction book after nonfiction book. That was my plan. And then kind of arrived at fiction through a very spectacular, unpredictable path. And I'm very excited by that. And that's taken the main focus now. And so we launched this book last year. And I would say the marketing efforts were pretty, so we self-published, right? And I'd say the marketing efforts have been pretty, very simple. It was mainly a family and friends announcement, right? And if you're a commercial person, you know that marketing is about pretty much everything but family and friends. That's not who you're relying on to, break something in. Certainly there are some useful contacts there to start with and all that, but obviously it was I had a little intimate book launch. I did some social media, announced it in a few circles. We handed out some books to people we've come across, but But that was about it. And so obviously there has been no meteoric. People ask me, how's sales going, Joe? How's sales going? I'm like, I actually don't really check. One time I did check the online sales. Most of the books that have been handed out have been print copies, but yeah, it was very unflattering. Very, very few sales. And I feel guilty because I feel like I should really what it requires is more marketing effort. Um, have to put the effort in, obviously, and do a fair bit of work if we're going to get this book out there more. And I would obviously love to get the book out there more, but there's been, competing interests, different priorities I have to juggle as a 30-year-old man who, finances are sometimes a bit tricky or uncertain, and decision making is always filtered by that. So anyway, it's really tested this idea of the audience of none. Because I spent like 3 years. It was a 3-year journey from when I met Paul to putting this book out. And so when you're looking for the validation from others to validate what you've done, that's a very interesting place to be. And part of me definitely has been curious about that because, I wonder, is this shit? Is it good? Is it great? And so it's very tricky trying to figure that out, obviously, with a low exposure. And, why do you even need to know? I don't, but naturally, something that meant so much, I spent so much time on, very natural to obviously want it to do well, to get in people's hands and for people to resonate with it. And while my ongoing financial stability is a question mark, so is a challenge I walk with, I know that even trying to get more exposure for this book is about very little to do with money per se, and a lot more to do with, for me personally, definitely appreciation and recognition and about connection. And there's been a few little instances of people, who've read the book talking to me and Paul, and one guy in particular who I was like, this guy really understands what we were trying to say and how we were trying to say it. And when we got that feedback, that just really reignited me. It really remotivated me to come back to trying to do more with this and try to do it justice. But it just reminds me how it's so much more about that with a project like this than, and look, it's what I'm trying to get at, I think, is I'm trying to explore and then share with whoever cares. I mean, it's all right if no one cares, obviously. What a funny, weird thing it is that this relationship with this thing I was a part of. And it's a fascinating thing to explore because with this not much kind of buzz we've created, but the book exists, it's very satisfying for me, from one level, that it just exists. So it's very satisfying to know that it exists, for one thing. And then secondly, without thousands of people being able to read the book and then to get that feedback, it's really made me develop my relationship with it myself in that audience metaphor way, without having too many external voices being able to inform that opinion. So in other words, not looking for other people to inform my opinion around this thing I made with Paul. Couldn't have done it without Paul. Love you, Paul, if you're out there listening. And he would be right there in this journey, by the way. I'm yet to have this conversation with him per se, but, and even though I'm still at a point where I do need to make a living, It's like you still know that you didn't do it and not relying on it for money. It's definitely about more, even though that part of it would be useful, right? Because you don't expect to get money from a self-published book. And it just makes me reflect more and more about, what's it all about and what's the point? And obviously, like, I'm going to be a big shot, right? I might not be appreciated in my time, but we all know, like, over time, my books are going to get proper infamy, obviously. Okay. So it's interesting to have this period to think about. And what it is, I have moments where I think about something in this book, a scene, the balance of characters, the way we did it. And I find myself like doing it's a little sad. It's probably just sad. I should be sharing this, but it's almost like a little pat myself on the back. It's like, I'm proud of us coming up with that angle. I'm proud of us doing that with the characters and combining this like the humor, but with that deep moment and adding that. And I'm sure most of the stuff we put in, no one will ever notice. And how that scene next to that scene is actually to show how this behavior is linked. But people may or may not notice that's a comment about how certain behaviors in the workplace are. So this is just me rambling about, wow, what's the journey really about? And I think it is just a fascinating thing to go through. I'd wish this for everyone, especially the struggle part of it. It's a struggle, but it's not a struggle because I'm a very fortunate young man with the support I have, the people around me, and the opportunities available to me. So I'm not struggling, and yet I'm also kind of in a way struggling continuously. And as Paul always says to me, talking about many other much more talented artists, authors, filmmakers, etc., is that they often, those types often really are forced to suffer for their art. And that's because of a certain commercial reality about the demand for and how to get paid for certain things like acting and writing and music and all these stuff can be hard careers to sustain. But I kind of see a spiritual, which, it's my tendencies to see a spiritual angle, guilty as charged. But I do see a very powerful spiritual angle to it as well. Because of working out that relationship of not that it's just for you. Does that make sense? Not that it's like, oh, I did this and it's just for me. But because of my, if you go back to my conductor metaphor, that for the right music to be played, you must first be comfortable with playing your music regardless of who enters the audience. And see, when I did that Audience of None article 5 years ago, probably, and a friend of mine, bless her soul, and best people you'd ever meet your entire life, she put it on her Facebook. She's a very artistic person, probably the most artistic person I know. And I'll remember forever that someone commented, yeah, this is great, but I can honestly say that I don't think I would create something if it wasn't for an audience and people receiving it. And I think that's fine. But my natural wondering is, obviously, practically, yes, we'd always want someone to be on the receiving end. But deep down in the heart of hearts, is there something else going? Is there is there a need for an external validation there? We all have a need for an external validation, but a strong one that might be tainting the experience. There might be ultimately a net drain on the whole joy and value of it. That's what I wonder. That Audience of None question, I always loved it. I feel like it always exposed things about people. Because my thing with writing, it's like it's not a choice. I have no choice. I am so compelled to do it. Part of the reason I haven't put more effort into marketing this one is because I've been writing the next book. And there's a thing to be said about the systems we have in our world that our systems are not like the most ideal systems. So I can talk about the book world. So I'm not an expert on the book publishing world, right? And I've been self-publishing to this point and will continue to do so for the foreseeable. That's the plan. But my understanding of the book publishing world, which might be an insight for many of you, is the traditional publishing model where you get some big publisher is that you pitch them the story. I think the same way you'd pitch a film, right? You haven't made it yet. You come up with basically an outline, a one-page sheet to start with, and then maybe like a bigger case study. Because obviously a publisher, how on earth does a publisher vet which books they will sign it authors up to it? Because they give you in advance, typically. They give you some of money, which then is your cash runway to go and write the book. Obviously, because that way you have money, you can pay rent, you could pay for groceries, so you can do all that. So obviously, and then I think you would have a deadline. So I haven't gone through this process. I've researched it from the outside, talked to publishers. If any of that's wrong or lacks nuance, I apologize. But that's my general understanding. So you have to sell someone on this vision of the book before the book's written. Say, I can't right now, with the ideas I have right now, I can't fathom that. Because the book I'm writing now, called The Oracle, which I've spent on and off a year, 18, not consistently, but in between everything else I'm doing with the Holy Shit book, with work, real estate work, all that, is I don't know what it's going to be. And you know what? It has changed so much. I'm just digging through I would describe it as digging through a piece of marble, a big block, trying to find the sculpture inside. I can't tell anyone what it is at this point because I'm still digging. And so that process, that creative process obviously has merit because it's the one that appeals to me. So I know that through my own experience. But that doesn't fit in with and it's no one's fault, but the sort of publishing system that we have now. Bless my lucky stars, I was born in a time of self-publishing. But this is I guess this is my point, and it probably comes back to that book Fountainhead with the Howard Rourke story and all these things, is that it doesn't always neatly fit. And so we have a reality, and it's always interesting to see where we, as unique people, as creative forces, where we brush up against that reality. And unless you're hurting someone or putting someone else out with how you approach it and what resonates with you to create, I don't think there can be anything wrong with what feels natural. It obviously has consequences. And if you look at that book as a good example, the Fountainhead and the Howard Rourke character, you see, yeah, it has consequences. But that struggle and that pain can be very meaningful because it's obviously, the harshness of experience creating that deeper self-guided inner journey, very cute education, and about a deepening relationship and a deepening trust in yourself. Powerful. Why do I say stuff that's so powerful for? I don't know. Anyway, that's just basically, this book's online. So if you want to check out the satire in the workplace, obviously go and buy the hell out of it. It is funny. And the feedback, it's been limited feedback. The feedback has been largely good, which is very, very nice to hear. But yeah, I don't know. I'm going to try again to make more YouTube videos and podcast episodes. I'm on a back and forth on going down and doing a dedicated comedy channel as well, a new comedy satire podcast. So you can wait and see if that eventuates, if anyone's still hung on through this whole rant. Yeah. And I think maybe I'm turning a page. I think maybe I'm turning a page with how to balance all the exciting creative things I want to do. And yeah, I think there might be a sustained go at this now. I think I'm leveling up. but we shall see. Yeah, so keep an eye out. Keep an eye out. I have some videos planned around Brave New World, um, around Anthony DeMello, who you might not have heard of. Maybe catching up with Luke. So there are some things, but obviously this video has been long enough, and also I need a pee. If you made it to the end, I hope there was some trinkets of value in there. Is that a word? Trinkets of value? Thanks for joining me. Keep opening doors, and I will see you around. Peace out.